Okay, how we started. Okay, we have some people joining.
Okay, set up my background. There we go.
Can give a couple minutes. Okay, I think we can start. Okay, so hello everyone, good afternoon. I'm Maida, and on behalf of the College of Architecture and Environmental Design at Kent State, I'd like to welcome to the Cleveland Urban Design Collaborative Spring Lecture Series. Our lecture series this semester is loosely organized around the theme of hybridity and how it reflects in the hybrid worlds that we often find ourselves in, especially nowadays, right? We use the lecture series to bring new voices in the community design conversation here in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio itself. And today is our third lecture in the series, and it's entitled Virtual Disruption, a Post-Disciplinary Practice by Marlon Davis. Marlon is a designer who works across a range of scales from architecture to landscape architecture, graphic design, and industrial design. He holds a bachelor's degree in landscape architecture at Rutgers University and a master's of architecture at Pratt Institute. He worked as instructor at Rutgers University and is currently teaching at Rhode Island School of Design and Pratt Institute. He has a research on intersections of racial disparities in architectural behavior and creation. And as a former designer at D. Young, he worked on the design of stages for Alicia Keys, Rihanna, and also contributed to the design of projects ranging from Snapchat, Virtual Partner Summit on 2020, and the design of Google event activation for the 2020 Olympics in Japan. Marlon utilizes his 3D modeling and representation skills across many medias, as you can imagine, and is always seeking new ways to utilize computational tools in creative ways. And after all that, I present to you Marlon Davis. Welcome to the CUDC.
Well, hello, thank you. Thank you for such a great introduction. I'm gonna share my screen with you all to kind of begin. Let's go back to my title page here, slideshow, and I'm gonna share my screen. Make sure you can see that. Bring this over. And I'm gonna play. So, can everyone see that? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. So today's lecture is titled "Virtual Disruption," and I really wanted to kind of take the idea of hybridity and really try to see exactly how that fits into the practice that I've been developing over the last few years. Just to give you some background on myself, you already heard that I studied landscape architecture and architecture, but I think in school I struggled to find where I existed or where my place was, specifically being someone of African descent in the U.S. My family is African American. I'm from Philadelphia and New Jersey and Willingboro, where I grew up. But I struggled to find how I could be I could be in a place where my interests are being massaged or being championed, but also being able to understand architecture and landscape architecture socially and creatively. So when I started to think back about my journey over the last few years since graduating from Pratt in 2018, I believe the practices that I've been involved in are quite hybrid. They're incredibly dynamic in how I practice. So I just wanted to get into some projects that I've kind of developed to begin to think about how I can be dynamic and elusive in the design environment, and also develop a little bit of resiliency with my practice, especially during COVID and things like that. But to begin, I wanted to just kind of start with how I started my practice after graduation. After graduation, I had started teaching at Rutgers University, teaching the landscape architecture department. I started teaching representation. And it was an incredible opportunity that I loved, and it made me understand that I loved teaching. But I also had a huge interest in designing stages and events and spaces that were a little bit more short in terms of their time span or how long they would last. because I was a little bit frustrated with my position right out of school in 2018, just because it wasn't as fast paced as I'm normally used to. So I created a number of hypothetical projects that would allow me to convince people that I could study, I could create stages and create events, which I had no experience in. I never worked in that space, but I figured that I try to use my representation skills to be convincing, or convincing enough to let people know that I'm interested in stage design and fashion, because I believe that my practice in relation to culture is really important, in terms of our ideas as architects, and cultural production being an important aspect of what we do. I always wanted to be involved in that space. Let me just also check. Oh, you can't see, no one can see any slides? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we are seeing your home screen. Sorry.
Oh, sorry about that. Let me go back and let me share my screen. I'm sorry about that. Share screen, stop sharing my screen. Share screen. Can everyone see that? And if I play, can you see that?
Yeah, now we can see the presentation, yes.
Okay, cool, thank you. Ooh, forgive me. So again, I created a number of hypothetical representations and projects on my website to be able to convince people that I could design, or I could create in a space where I didn't have to be just an architect. You know, I could be a graphic designer, I could be an animator, I can be an event designer. You get a lot of production. The skills that you could learn in that space, I thought were really enticing, in a little bit of a change from my architecture background and my landscape background, but all the skills that I was able to use and learn in my landscape architecture background and education and architecture education kind of allowed me to create these projects to get into these spaces in New York, primarily where I'm based. So some of the images that you see are just images from my site, some images from a few projects that I was trying to create. Even the one on the left-hand side is a project for storefront for architecture in New York City, which is to me an important hypothetical project to envision myself in this space and begin to inject a sense of identity into the work that I was creating. So one of the first projects that I did in 2018 with a friend of mine, his name is Malcolm Dia. He's the founder of a company called Manual Photo Company. We decided to kind of get involved in this project for Root Studios and begin to think about how we can use our visualization skills to project elements into the scene, or into this opening for Root Studio, which is a photography studio in New York City. It was the first time I had ever been in a space to design an event, and it was a unique opportunity for me to showcase some of those skills, some of that representation skill that I enjoyed, so I can help envision what our project would be like. So we met with the studio space and we created a number of renderings and animations to show how we would use projection to create a unique space for the entire event. Here's some more representation that I would utilize using Rhino as my base. But we would go to these studios and show them imagery to communicate what our ideas for the event would be, and possible material that they could use for advertising or presenting. Just more of the visuals from that event. This is just more of an animated camera from the actual event, and some more visualization. All of this would play during the showcase, but it was a great way for me to test how I can use architecture and landscape architecture in a way that wasn't taught to me in school. You know, I think that it was a way to be in a world that was changing rapidly, but the definitions of what defined what landscape architecture were, what they could be, were relatively limited to me. So I thought of using a lot of those skills in this manner. Here's just some more visualization that I've done with Malcolm as well, just more 3D rendering and animation for his website. But another medium in which I thought could be important to kind of introduce myself as a graphic designer or animator as well, which I take very seriously, and I'm really involved in the craft of making in the 3D environment. Here's some more of the projects that I did in terms of making hypothetical animations or renderings. These are just some stills from more representation that I was exploring, utilizing 3D modeling, using Adobe Premiere and a number of other software to begin to think about what concert visuals might even look like. What does that become, or how do I come up with a concept or an art direction to share with an artist to create an identity for these artists, for an artist that I like. Mick Jenkins is one of them. And here's one of the last projects that I was trying to engage with, trying to have hypothetical projects where I maybe collaborate with a brand called Kinfolk. Kinfolk is a club in New York City that also has a clothing line. And as you can see in the background, I'm very much into fashion and involved, and I just love being able to work in that space. Even though architecture and landscape are my primary mediums of study, I knew and I had an inkling that these can be deployed in a number of spaces, including a club, or turning that club into an event space, something like that for Nike. So I would use my architectural skills to envision what that space might look like through maybe line drawings, and then utilize my skills in maybe 3D modeling to design posters and 3D model shoes that might be showcased in the space. So these exercises really allow me to understand how I can communicate three-dimensionally my ideas across a wide range of mediums. So one thing that I really started getting into around that time was being able to understand 3D fashion and representation, just to kind of strengthen my visualization skill set, to develop that hybridity that we've been discussing, or that the lecture series has been highlighting. And my primary reason for that was because I always felt that architecture's scope sometimes in school remains a little bit rigid, or maybe just not as informed about what's happening with some of the, maybe in contemporary culture, maybe within fashion or music. I think there are aspects of architectural discourse that are a little bit slow at times with getting with the times, and I think a lot of that is being shown or seen now. But I decided to use some of my 3D capabilities to learn how to deal with cloth or movement in 3D, to begin to strengthen my skill set further. And I would engage with a number of fashion shows, either at work at Dayon, that would allow us to create visualization to look at how we can take a space and turn it into something dynamic. And this is kind of the beginning of where a lot of the virtual environment research came in when I was working at Dayon. A lot of these images, this image and this one, are studies for 3D environments during COVID, trying to postulate on how to take the pandemic and be a little bit more resilient in how we present material. A lot of what we were doing was physical environments, or physical stages, or physical events. But I think a lot of the exploration that we did during that time really helped me understand how utilizing 3D skills can be something that can empower myself, even in a tumultuous time that was COVID, and it allowed me to kind of jump into 3D designing and 3D art as a real practice. So at Dayon, I had the great opportunity of working with the Shed in New York City, at Hudson Yards, and also it was a collaboration with Equinox and Alicia Keys. So this was the first concert design that I had created or was able to work on with Dayon. And this is about 4 months after I created all of those hypothetical visuals that I wanted to use to convince people that I could design stages. And no, I had never done it before, but having worked at Dayon, and I was freelancing a little bit prior at Mad Projects, I think the studio really believed in my abilities to come in and really make an impact and design, not just hypothetically, but in a real space. So this project was really informative for me as someone that wanted to be able to have an impact in culture, or how I can work in contemporary culture while utilizing my architectural abilities. So this particular stage design was a huge learning moment for me to work with Alicia Keys and her team, and also understand how to work with a number of fabricators and vendors that made this happen, whether they're the lighting designers or the people that are doing the or programming the lighting to the music, or building out the stage, building out the structure for the stage, who's going to be hanging the structures from the ceiling. All of these elements begin to be super important as I started working on this project. Just here's just some more images of that work, just to kind of show just how that visualization came into play. And I just wanted to show just a quick video that I started making, or some of the things that I would show to help clients understand what the project would look like. A lot of this is kind of right out of Rhino, which a lot of you I'm sure are familiar with. But I utilize a lot of this software to communicate in as many ways as I can to help the client really get a serious understanding of what I wanted to create or what we wanted to make. But the importance for me was the fact that it was also for Alicia Keys, or Alicia Keys was the person that it was for. So to be involved in her team and working on a project such as that helped me think about how I can really begin to affect culture with the work that I began to create. And here are just some renderings that I would make to help communicate what the stage might look like. These were done in Cinema 4D to kind of let them know what our vision was for the project and how it was executed, which is another image of that. And I just love being able to look at a rendering and then see how it manifests itself in real life, because it sometimes is so close to what you modeled that it's almost unreal. One of the other projects that I was able to work on with Dayan was for Fenty Skin, one of Rihanna's, one of her companies where she operates pretty well, whether it's Fenty Skin or Savage Fenty, or, you know, shout out to her, she just got pregnant too with Is That Rocky, you know, God bless him. But I really had a great time working on that project as well, because it, again, Rihanna being an important beacon of culture today, I thought it was a great way to showcase some of my skill set in order to make the event special. So for this particular project, I got the opportunity to design the space in which she would do her announcement for the event. It was a large house party event based off of Kid and Play's famous show or famous movie, House Party. But it was really just to create an online experience that allow people to connect during COVID, but also allow for her makeup line, her skincare line to be launched virtually. So it was a really big moment for myself, and being able to create the environment in which she did that in tandem with some of my classmates some of my coworkers at Dayan was incredibly rich to do. And here's just some imagery of how we designed this space utilizing 3D software, using Cinema 4D and WebGL to create the space and art direct an environment in which people can, or users can walk through and interact with the space. So it was a really cool opportunity to have worked on that. So around that time, this is 2020. So towards the end of 2020, I was able to get in contact with the Black Architects and Designers Guild, where Layden Lewis and Nina Cook-John and Melanie Barnett were heading up a project called the Obsidian Virtual Concept House that would showcase what the Black family would look like in 2030. That was kind of the prompt that I was given. A friend of mine was the connect to that opportunity. So I was asked by Nina Cook-John and Layden Lewis, who I really respect and are really incredible movers and shakers in the architecture community, especially as Black designers, both of which are from the Caribbean. They're incredibly influential, but they were the lead architects for a project that would showcase over 30 interior designers as well. But the task that they asked me to do was to understand how the landscape would work. Most of the people on the staff were primarily interior designers. There were some landscape architects as well, all of which incredibly talented. But they asked me, hey, Marlon, could you figure out what happens with the landscape and sculpt it and come up with a concept to animate and render the entire environment in which this house would live? I think it was a great project to showcase a lot of Black designers that didn't get a lot of, that don't get a lot of representation in terms of the work that they're doing. So I think this was a huge moment for Black Architects and Designers Guild to present that work. And it got a lot of traction because of the visualization. A lot of the visualization was done in conjunction with Autodesk and their rendering softwares, but a number of other vendors that helped create this space and make it interactive, which is some of the animations you see in the slides right now. So it was one of the best projects or one of my favorite projects that I was able to work on, primarily because of one, just being able to work with Black designers and architects that are really movers and shakers in the space, especially in them being able to trust in me to be able to design a landscape that would actually complement the work. And that has been really fruitful for myself and just my practice to understand how the work can also be a beacon of hope for others to understand how utilizing design and architectural thinking or design thinking can really begin to put some resiliency into your way of making. These are just some other renderings, some images of some of the landscape in the background on the left here of how I was shooting the landscape in the design. And it was a really important aspect of the project because I thought it really helped to bring everything together on the site. So one tons of Black film, or a film that would be considered Black cinema. It was an incredible project that
I think we lost Marlon for a little bit. He'll be back in a second. Hi.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened.
I think we lost you for a second.
Yes, forgive me. Let me share my screen. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
Let me go back to that. Forgive me. Share screen. Excuse me, I'm just finding myself, finding where I left off. Okay.
No, don't worry. We're very excited about your lecture. It's very inspiring.
Sorry about the technical difficulties here. It's like anything that can go wrong will go wrong with me. So bear with me for 10 seconds as I get my screen right. Share. Okay, we're back. We should be back.
Don't worry, that happens. Yes.
Okay, cool. And were you guys at Blur first? Yeah.
Yes.
We're at Blur. Okay. So to get back into what I was doing, there was a project that I was asked to be involved with a gentleman named Anthony Kambonye, and he was one of the main people that I was able to meet in New York City. I met him randomly in Soho because he saw a pair of shoes that I was wearing because I'm really into Pierre Moss, an incredible fashion designer in New York and abroad, really one of the leading, if not the leading designer, Black designer right now. But when I met Anthony, he asked me, "Hey, what's going on with your shoes?" And I said, "Yeah, I thought they were really cool." It was random, but I didn't know that he was the art director for Pierre Moss at the time. So he kind of didn't reveal that until the end of the conversation. And he asked, "Hey, would you want to help create an event that's highlighting a number of filmmakers that I'm kind of curating? I just need someone to help design the space." And I said, "Hey, I do stage design and fashion show currently at Dayon. Would you want to work together?" And we started working together to make this happen. So some of the artists that were presented were Alex Ash, Garrett Bradley, Renata Charlize, and Russell Hamilton. There was just a number of incredible people involved with trying to get the project going on. So what we tried to do was begin to make a space. I'm just going to show a little bit of visualization on how building out the project began, just to show how I kind of begin to think about organizing a site or organizing a design around an event such as this. So I would work with Anthony, and we would go to a 98 Orchard, which was the gallery, and we would design these layouts to begin to think about how we can showcase all of these artists in a super narrow space and kind of tell the challenges that might be faced. But we were able to get 5 screens in this long exhibition space and present this incredible and kind of atmospheric space, utilizing only screens and a number of partitions to close off space. Just some more representation to show how we were thinking about people maybe moving in and out of the space. There was some ideas about maybe rotating or slanting the screens in order to just make for a more dynamic and useful use of the space. So here's just more sections just to kind of showcase that, utilizing some more architectural representation to do that. And this is kind of part of how the exhibition was set up. If you can imagine how we thought of the screens and the exhibition space and how they can work together. During a live screening of all of these movies or all of these films became an incredible event that I'll never forget, and it's also kind of propelled me into a number of spaces where exhibition design has become part of the practice as well. This here's one of the images I thought was really powerful from the exhibition, just because of the orientation of the screen and just the amount of care that people had to not begin to be on that space, or just to really cherish the videos and the films. And I just thought it was a really powerful piece to see how the design began to manifest itself. And then this is one of the artists that performed at the event, just to kind of add another level or another layer of performance into the space. Here's some more imagery from that event. You can see I'm probably writing this. I'm right here in the corner if you can't see, but it was a really great opening event which was one of the first design projects that I ever worked on as an exhibition designer. And just here's some more images from that event. And this occurred here in New York, in the Lower East Side. Last year, I was also able to work with the designers workshop. It's headed by Cam Glenn in New York, who's an independent designer, but she created pretty much a forum to showcase Black designers, pretty much to allow for an understanding of how or who was moving and shaking in the industry now, just so there's a kind of a community of designers that you can connect with. I think oftentimes as a designer, especially a Black designer, it's sometimes isolating. I think when you're in an event design meeting and there might be 40 people or 50 people, and then you may really be the only representative of I guess my community, which can be really isolating, especially when the artists that I tend to work with or that I was working with are of African descent. So I always thought that was interesting. So to be able to have this forum to connect with a number of designers in the space, it allowed me to kind of understand the importance of community in the design space, and sharing our stories. So this really helped me to understand this part of the practice of sharing. And these are just some of the images from that shoot. We did a shoot and a video series called The Message that I thought was really interesting. So just to kind of transition over to some of the research that I've been doing, I wanted to kind of start off by reading this quote. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, a sense of always looking at one's self through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks in amused contempt and pity, whenever feels his two-ness in America as his two-ness. An American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two reconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose Dodge strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and American without being cursed and spit on by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his face. So pretty much what I'm going to be talking about is this idea of really beginning to uncover history about the built environment that begin to allow me to use my creative abilities, or the things that I've been amassing in terms of skills. I guess that hybrid approach to design, and begin to inflect that or insert that into my research. So my thesis when I ended graduate school at Pratt was called a studio called Living Just Enough, headed by Peter Macapia at the Pratt School of Architecture, Graduate Architecture and Urban Design department. But it was the first time I had ever seen or ever had a studio that was purely based on understanding justice in the built environment. And for me, as a person that kind of sees the built environment and the material of the built environment as a pretty great marker of understanding how our economy tends to invest in spaces that will, I guess, garnish more money. But for me, the things that are manifested in our environments, whether it's policing or maybe ideas about displacement, began to really start to permeate in my mind. Because of the climate too. I think when I took this class, it was 2018, so Black Lives Matter was already in flux, or not in flux, it was already off the ground. So I really wanted to begin to think about how I can relate my research to the times or to the moment. And I thought that this class, which began by looking at a song by Stevie Wonder, just to be able to think about how we can listen to a city, right? Which is really the essence of the project. But thinking about justice and who becomes the what's the word I'm looking for? The witnesses for what's happening with justice in our cities. So the first thing that I started to research was Philadelphia, primarily because that's where my family is from. And I wanted to utilize, and our task was to think about a city that we can study its relationship to justice and its relationship to juridical procedure, also policing, and how they all might work in tandem to create a lot of ideas about who can do and who can't do things in the city. So ideas about law and property become really potent when you're studying the built environment. So that was really what I began to really start thinking about when I started studying Philadelphia. It began with just a couple of stories that I had heard as a kid, predominantly from my father and my grandfather, about a bombing that occurred in Philadelphia. I don't think I really had a lot of understanding of it as someone who lived in Philadelphia and then moved to Willingboro, New Jersey, where I grew up. I was completely displaced from the event itself. I remember riding past where the event happened, and there would be commentary, but I didn't know the severity of the event until beginning to study Philadelphia and seeing what may have been one of the darkest moments of its existence as a city, and how the city may have, or I kind of postulate, relative kind of conspired in a way, or was very complicit in the death of a number of people. So I wanted to start by just reading this quote. When dawn came again to West Philadelphia, it seemed that even the skies mourned. The blue skies of May 13 had given way to dark, low clouds. The late spring warmth of the day before had turned thick and oppressive, and the gray light of dawn, scattering firefighters stood among the ruins, playing water across still smoldering debris. Amid the rising steam and smoke, crumbling structures emerged from the darkness. The firewalls that had once separated the homes on this street, they were the only thing left standing in the rubble. So what I'm referring to is the Osage Ave's bombing in Philadelphia. It occurred in 1985, and I will get into what the events that transpired kind of, I guess, inspired me to start studying this a little bit more holistically. So what was the conflict? So MOVE on May 13, 1985, a bomb was dropped on the row house in West Philadelphia. The bomb was an attempt to forcibly evict the residents of 6221 Osage Ave, the home of a radical organization called MOVE. This is just some imagery of the home, or the row homes that stood before this bomb was dropped on the city of Philadelphia. The bomb itself was actually obtained by the Philadelphia police, by the FBI, which was also illegal. but it was their last stitch effort to evict MOVE members, 11 of which were killed in the bombing. 5 of which, and a number of which were, most of which were women, and 5 children died in the explosion or in the aftermath as well. So there was 11 people that were murdered because of a conflict that began years before. And I got a huge amount of insight about it from my grandfather, who used to work in the prisons and also was working in the DA's office. And so this here is just an image of the house and how there were MOVE members living here as a community. MOVE members, or MOVE was in a way a green anarchist group, if you will, and radical group really born out of a tradition or a lot of tradition from the Black Power movement, and in kind of this idea about radical love in a way towards the environment. So MOVE began to think about ways to treat the environment much more humane, become a steward of the environment by digging up asphalt in their backyard. They were really big proponents of animal rights. They were growing food in their backyard. They were composting. But I think there were feuds with the residents of the neighborhood because things like composting and growing food in the backyard would also begin to attract vermin, which began to become a big problem for the city. And it began to become a point of conflict for the residents on Osage Ave, and also the police, who were asked to begin to solve this problem. I think that another reason, or another big part of MOVE's ideology, was being able to protest or begin to resist ideas about about policing in the city. They're very much against a lot of the policing tactics in the city. They were very much against Frank Rizzo, who was one of the main police during that time. But I believe that their involvement in the city in terms of these acts of radical love to kind of protest how the city was treating people of color primarily and how they were treating the environment began to become an agitation, or become agitating to police in Philadelphia, or just the neighborhoods. So that began to be something that my grandfather began to talk to me about as I began the research. He worked in the DA's office, so he told me of stories of MOVE coming into the DA's office to protest or to ask for the release of members that were arrested during protests or during police check-ins with them. So it was a place where MOVE began to come into a space and try to change or get what they wanted in terms of releasing their members. So for me, that was a point of emphasis to begin to study further, because he mentioned that Mumia Abu-Jamal, who was a huge writer in the space, or in the ideas about radicalization and pretty much against any form of police brutality, a great intellectual who was accused of a murder in Philadelphia and subsequently placed in jail, was also present during these moments where MOVE would be in the DA's office where my grandfather worked. So I thought, in terms of that relationship, or the spectator or the witnessing that my grandfather was engaging in, really began to allow me to see this event through his eyes, or through a different lens, with all of these players very much in the midst. So I just wanted to kind of show you. So this is some images. I'm going to go quick too, so we can have questions. This is some of the aftermath of the MOVE bombing that happened, that really took almost an entire block in Philadelphia away from the fires, because the fires were allowed to burn for hours even after the bomb was dropped. And it's destroyed an entire block in the city, basically. There were about 66 homes that were destroyed. And this was for an eviction of a radical organization that only occupied one of these homes. So when I think about the egregiousness of the event and how it actually began to be a huge nuisance in the city because of the fact that they destroyed 66 homes due to this violent eviction. So I just wanted to show some of the images from that. This is when the fire happened. There was a number of people that took a lot of photography to show the event and how it was playing out. But the fire was allowed to burn, and hence why there were a number of homes that were allowed to be destroyed. a kind of erasure that I believe kind of destroyed the movement in a sense, because it killed a number of members as well. And this is just the aftermath of the event. So there was, in essence, a sort of demolition that the city enacted, and I began to really research why this was happening and how this might actually affect the city and affect the environment. A lot of what I started finding was that even there was a study on move in pamphlet architecture that I had never heard about or never known existed. But this is pamphlet architecture, which I actually have right now. I just have it right here. It's a really good book on move. It's called Move Sites of Trauma. It's by Johanna Salehi Dickinson. But her ideas about understanding erasure and how sites of trauma can really affect us psychologically, but then thinking about ways to change that or affect that in the future began to be something I thought about a lot. Just to give you a little more context about MOVE and how the conflict began, it all actually started in 1978. Just when I began to start getting really deeper into the research. So a lot of what Johanna Salehi Dickinson begins to research is the examination of post-traumatic stress disorder, and how she kind of framed her discussion about MOVE from that point of view, and how MOVE began to modify not only their social environment, but their buildings through these barriers and protections against what they perceived as a threat from the police and possibly the city. So her ideas about these barriers that get built up and I guess begin to take over the structure in a serious way of modifying their built environment to protect themselves began to be a point of emphasis for me. So this is in 1978. This is in the Powelton Village section of Philadelphia. And in some of the images, you can see the MOVE members in front of their Powelton Village compound, or a place where they would live together. There would be a number of MOVE members here living together in harmony. A lot of what they how they dressed, a lot of it was wearing dreadlocks, and a lot of people didn't like the outward appearance of them because it was they felt maybe threatened by it, or they felt that it was different. So I think that their radical position, even visually, began to whether it's their building or how they might dress, began to be a threat to people living in the environment and the police as well. Due to a lot of their protesting throughout the city, which is a big part of their practice as people that were really into the stewardship of the land. It began to create a lot of conflict between them and the police, and subsequently many members began to get arrested. So they continuously protested the release of these prisoners that were being arrested by the police unjustly. And eventually they began to keep themselves even more protected by building these barriers around their homes. A lot of it you can see on the surfaces of the windows. You can see it in this barrier that they built as a fence, but they also, as you can see with this gentleman standing up here, that they built even a stage to begin to project their own thoughts about the world, or what they thought about the system, which they would mention often on their way to kind of resisting what the police were trying to do. One of the reasons I thought this is fascinating is because in the conversation with my father, he mentioned how there was a time where my grandfather and him were stopped at this house to begin just talking to one of the MOVE members, because they also sold watermelon in the city, and my grandfather would purchase from them often. And he mentioned after having sat there talking for about 30 minutes, they were pulled over by the police. After that, my father said he was only 14 when that happened. So I really began to think about what this began to do to the city and how this event started to change. So after a long standoff with the police over being evicted, they were trying to move from this space again, like they were doing on Osage Ave. And they succeeded. Again by force. So the event pretty much lasted a number of days, where the police were shooting water cannons at them. They were shooting tear gas at them, and that it also ended in a standoff. They tried to say, or there has been evidence that they say has been found on site where they believe or they suggest that Move shot the first shot, and subsequently there was a police officer killed in the gunfight. A lot of people postulate that maybe the gunfire might have come from police, because a lot of the weapons that may have been found weren't even operational. And in the end, these 9 Move members that were arrested and put in jail, and a lot of them with life sentences or very long-term sentences for the murder of for the alleged murder of a police officer. All 9 of them were charged for that murder, and it became a really big point of emphasis for Move members that weren't in the building or were able to continue on to continue resisting the police in that manner. So this is the site currently, and how that erasure was very potent on that site in Powelton Village in Philadelphia. And I wanted to kind of just show that idea of erasure. I'm just going to kind of speed through the rest just to kind of give you a little bit of understanding. Just so Move was founded by, it was originally the Christian Movement for Life. That's kind of where the idea of Move comes from. It's basically a Black militant green anarchist group founded in 1972 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, by John Africa. And the style is named with all capital letters, and it's not an acronym, Move. So I just wanted to talk about their ideologies. They were pretty much a back to nature, I guess, organization that really thought about how to think about life after the Anthropocene, which is a big point of emphasis I see in architecture, and has been a point of emphasis in landscape architecture for my studies for some time. But they would protest to allow for the city to begin to utilize a lot more green infrastructure that now is actually much more popular. So in a way, I believe them being champions of what we preach today, as a way to connect with what they were doing at Move, or how they were practicing at Move. Just to kind of show some of the modifications that they were doing. They're creating these spaces to kind of shield themselves from what was happening with the policing in the city. Here's just a couple of diagrams from the pamphlet architecture book on Move, discussing how they were actually even modifying their space, going from a relatively open porch typology that's really popular in Philadelphia. Like the stoop is a very important place. It's really the point of most social interaction in Philadelphia. But because of the threat Move felt from the city, they transformed their entire space to pretty much protect them and close them off from the city. So this idea of erasure, this is right after the bombing of the city in the 80s, and this is what happened to the site. This is how it is now. And currently the site is only occupied by two people that live on the site now, because the conditions of the remodeling of that space are so dire that everyone pretty much left. There are a few people on Osage Ave that have stayed, resisting money from the city to purchase these homes and redevelop again, just to maintain some idea of history on that site. So some of the new directions that I've been thinking of and been postulating with Peter Macapia and David Tucker, a recent graduate at the Graduate Architecture School of Design at Pratt. We designed a class called Spaces of Erasure, New Paths for Design, where we study a number of sites that are erased from history, erased from architectural history, and never given any light in any of my studies, which I think is kind of absurd when you think about how we are the designers of the built environment. We built the stages for people's lives, you know. So when I think about studying the city holistically over time, and how there are forces that interact with each other that might be a threat to the life and safety of Black people in this country, I thought it was a great way to provide some research and maybe some understanding on how to share these stories in a meaningful way, and actually insert this thinking into the canon of design thinking. So this idea of erasure was something that I've been beginning to art direct into a exhibition that I'll be sharing a lot more throughout the next couple of months. But this is one image that I really thought was beautiful in the way in which the lighting begins to start this idea of erasure. And this is kind of what happened to Move members, kind of taking an Afrofuturist point of view, retell this story. But this is maybe one of the art directions that I was thinking about utilizing to showcase this idea about erasure. But this image right here was one of Skepta's album covers. He's a rapper from the UK. But for me, it began to help me think about how this inversion or this warmth that Move was given to the environment can be, I guess, changed in order to tell a narrative about Move and their stories about affecting the landscape and allowing the landscape to become overgrown. So this is kind of where my ideas about my practice and the diversity of experiences that I've been utilizing or learning kind of come into play for me to jump into an art direction to show how I can tell this story. I've been utilizing this heat map idea to kind of show this warmth or invert this idea of the flame that exists in this lighting to allow it to emanate from Move, because that's exactly what I feel that they were doing. They had the energy to think about what we were doing to the environment and how to become agents of change in that space. And I've been utilizing these flowers in 3D space to begin to allow the existing Move space to become inhabited by floral renderings that I'm not going to show. I'm just going to show some of the process stuff. This is some of the images of how I've begun to do this or create these renderings. But I wanted to be able to create this visual representation of Move's ideology on the site in order to tell the story, not create a new architecture, but to tell a story that's needed in the canon of architecture at Pratt and anywhere else that wants to listen. So that's pretty much it. I wanted to end there because that's pretty much it. So thank you guys for tuning in. And yeah, I'm gonna open it up, I guess, for any questions or anything that there might be. But I had a great time just sharing some of the work I've been doing and how I've been trying to make sense of my practice as an instructor at RISD and an instructor at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, where I live. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Marlon. Sorry, that was incredible and extremely inspiring. It's great to see your work. And I'm sure the students are also faculty here in our team. If you guys have some questions or some contribution, it will be great. But thank you, Marlon. It was awesome.
Thank you. I do see one question. Thank you. That was very I grew up outside of Philly and was 18 when the Move bombing happened. I remember. Yeah, it was. I couldn't believe that. I'm from Willingboro, which is about 20 minutes outside of Philly. So I was in Philly all the time with my family. So when I learned about the bombing, I was really shocked that that was something that I never knew about. You know, it's something that is often forgotten or not talked about, especially a traumatic event such as that in the community. Especially because my grandfather and father never spoke about it that much either. But to find out about this, I guess, conflict and justice really helped me to see maybe what my research or how I can become an agent of change in the space, or just be critical of what we do as architects. I think a lot of my conversations and conversations with practitioners and educators about this idea of I guess post-disciplinary thinking, or this idea of being able to touch a lot of different, I guess, mediums at the same time, because it allows for resiliency. I think for me, there was points where I didn't know if I would even keep my job during COVID, but having these various abilities to maybe use for graphic design or maybe stages or a thing like a product or something allow me to iterate how to make an event or make a thing. But also when I thought about my research in grad school and Move, it really had a lot more meaning to me just because I enjoy education. So being able to I'm still trying to figure out how to blend them. I'm very new to teaching. Well, not new to teaching, but teaching full time. And really being serious about the research that I'm engaging with has been really fun for sure. I'm trying to use 3D tools that I use a lot in that way. I'm still figuring that out every day, but it's a great space to be in.
That sounds great. I think we have another question. Do you think the urban acupuncture of Move can be beneficial to current communities under erasure? What are the new interventions in the current situation that will be different from the 1970s?
Well, I think for me, one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is this idea about what happens or what happens after property, right? There's a class in Columbia. It's headed by Emmanuel Edmasu, who I've begun to develop a relationship with. He's one of the people that founded the Reconstructions Collective that had an event at the MoMA titled Reconstructions in Architecture. But when I looked at that event, or when I looked at that exhibition, it helped me to think about ways to at least tell the story. You know, I think there are ways that MOVE may have operated on their site that were actually illegal, right? But at the same time, there are these conflicts that arise from our ideas of property, right? I think the onset of the police, you know, their inception really is about protecting property. A lot of that has perpetuated even today, and that's a lot of the reason why I think that our ideas about eradicating it or maybe changing it or changing how they interact with people begins to be kind of tumultuous. Right now, I'm engaged in the studio right now with my students. It's called architecture, pretty much architecture after the Anthropocene. And I think there are a lot of tactics that we're doing then that our people are championing now. I think as planners and landscape architects, a lot of us are pretty aware of how to think about farming and food injustice and composting and beginning to allow for the landscape to breathe, right? That's one thing that MOVE would talk about, is they would rip up the concrete or any hard material to begin to think about how water might begin to percolate, or this idea of filtration or porosity in the ground to be stewards for the earth. I think that idea now has become much more popular, I guess, because of our much more urgent call for action when it comes to climate change. But I think the essence of MOVE in terms of their relationship to the earth, I think for me is one idea. I wouldn't say one practice in particular, but I think the essence of what they were doing, I think is what I think is so still potent today. Even the idea of being outspoken about and pretty resilient about how they discuss their radical ideas. But subsequently, those ideas were silenced because of, I guess, the threat to ideology in Philadelphia. So I hope that answers the question. And then anyway, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great, actually. And it's interesting that it's a topic nowadays, and before people didn't care too much. We have a couple more things in the chat. Stephen Regard said, "Thank you, Marlon, for showing such exciting work." And as I remember, the MOVE bombing was unique in the period that the press acknowledged how widely racist the Philadelphia police were at the time. And have you ever thought about ways to visualize that power structure and its continued effects?
Yeah, I think I guess there are a number of ways. I think for me, I try to engage more in an art practice than maybe trying to design a new space. I think that there are a number of people that I've engaged with designing work. Even Sean Canty, like a few days ago, in collaboration with David Ajay, just did a project showcasing MOVE or thinking about how to design a new space for MOVE. But for me, I think most of it is about storytelling, right? Most of it, for me, I showed some sneak peeks of some of the art direction I've been using to create large visualizations of what MOVE's ideology might be in terms of taking back ideas, taking back the city maybe with florals in an abstract way. And I think that's kind of how I envision utilizing my visualization skills. And that's kind of why I utilize the title Virtual Disruption to use the 3D environment to kind of create a number of futures or ideas about the synthetic futures. I'm really inspired by, I've been inspired by, his name is fleeting right now, he's in SciArc. He runs the film department. He's like one of the main actors there. I don't know why I'm, Liam Young, sorry. Yeah. Liam Young. Sorry, I couldn't figure that out, but I was been really inspired by Liam Young's work and how he's been, and a lot of his students and how they use film and animation to tell stories about a potential future. But I think sometimes that idea can be utilized to talk about events that have happened. Sometimes they may not have to show a synthetic future. They might just be able to I guess I'm using the metaphor of flowers to discuss their ideas, but that's how I try to make or visualize these events. I think I try to steer away from showing it in a negative light, just to celebrate move as a organization. But I think there are a number of ways to showcase these effects. And a lot of what I'll sometimes cite are things like artists like Levius Woods and how he studied places that were being bombed and how he was showing that visually. So those are some of my references when it comes to utilizing like a digital medium or this as a medium for an art practice to kind of, I guess, reinvigorate the architectural thinking. And a lot of it comes from that exhibition at the MoMA. It was the first time I think I ever felt like I was seen in an architectural space, or in architectural discourse, really, outside of this book that I found and outside of that exhibition. And hence why I think a lot of my charge is using art, or trying to translate the artistic representation that I use to tell these stories. So whether it's Move, or whether it's Slave Theater in Brooklyn, or it could be any tragedy that happened in the built environment when it comes to African American life. But that's really what I guess inspires me to keep moving, because I could have stayed in entertainment and just worked in that space and design cool things. But I think for me, I really just wanted to be able to say something or have some meaning in the work. A lot of it is still young, even though the project was in 2018. But I think that being in an academic space, to be able to allow those to get to be fed, by just all the people that I'm working with, but also speaking with my father and grandfather to retell that story. And then also I have plans to communicate with Move members directly to begin to really get a deeper understanding of how to tell this story properly. So I wanted to hold off on showing too much animation work, just because I want to get their blessing before I really go deeper. But that's kind of how I've been thinking about my practice.
Oh, that's great. I think we're a little bit over time, but I think we have time for one more question, do we? Okay. So Red TV said, really interesting work. Thank you for presenting. I especially enjoyed the way you began the presentation and the ways you have used architecture representation to represent yourself or to reimagine your work. How have your evolving views of representation transformed the way that you think about the design process?
I guess for myself, because I teach architectural projections at RISD, where I study a lot of designers that come from a mostly Eurocentric point of view. So I'm studying projections mostly from maybe Italian designers or French theorists on space and projection, or maybe even people thinking or postulating about mathematics and calculus and form. But I guess for myself, I've never seen a lot of myself in that space either. So being able to teach architectural representation at RISD, I think allows me to challenge that convention. So for me, I'd rather really study what I might be trying to challenge, or even teach it. Like, I think it's kind of a contradiction that I feel like I have to work with. Teaching architectural projections, but a lot of architecture's drawing conventions are about quantifying space or quantifying life. And I think a lot of practices that, especially when I think about Black life, or even books like Dark Space by Mario Gooden, thinking about how Black space, or spaces that are lived in by Black spaces, of Black people, can't really be quantified. I think I mentioned Emmanuel Masu a lot, but his ideas about measuring the immeasurable, like you can't measure certain spatial practices. But I think architectural projections and the idea of ideas about colonization and constantly subdividing land and space, those are the things that I try to challenge with my work. That's why I'm not trying to. Most of the work that I try to do visually is trying not to utilize those conventions all the time. I would say I'm definitely a master of projections and drawings, but I think being able to tell a more unique story often comes with trying to, and maybe it's too much, but I want to try to reject some of those ideas to think of a new way of thinking about art practice or production in architecture. So that's how I reimagine it. But I'm glad you like the work. I think that it's something that I've been trying to get better at every day. And I think another presentation was kind of all over the place, as I started with all the work that I've made and then the research. But I think that the jumbleness is still where I'm at. I'm still crafting a lot of my ideas about how to move forward in a space that's changing. I think that the window of opportunity is changing very quickly or rapidly right now when it comes to I guess this hangover now after Black Lives Matter, right? And I think there's a huge threat just in terms of what becomes important or what's deemed important and intellectually in academia, just by way of just like a huge idea about critical race theory and disrupting that or continuing to suppress that. So I think my charge is really in that space. And I think one of the last things that I'll say to shout out to my grandmother, but I remember she passed last year, but one of the books that I found of hers was from Stokely Carmichael, and then it was signed by him, and it said we owe our education to the toiling masses of our people. So I always think that that's really what helped me to shift. A lot of the representation is was for mostly brands and that really are trying to get more capital, right? It's not really doing much for for people, for Black life or society. So for me, a lot of the shift that I'm doing now in academia is related to that. How I reimagine myself in architecture and reimagine my work. It's a constant process. So that's kind of where I'm at with representation.
That's great. Thank you. Actually, I think the structure was great because then you presented yourself and how you see everything in the future. And I think most of us recognize ourselves trying to find where are we going. So thank you very much. I think Terry, Yvonne, do you have any comments or?
Just to say thank you. This was a really enlightening lecture. I mean, this kind of thought about erasure and trauma. There are obviously sites and cities everywhere where these issues apply. So I'm really interested to see where your work's going to go.
Oh, stay tuned. We'll see.
Thank you so much for the lecture, and hopefully get to see a lot more of you.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to stay in contact. I'll come out there.
Yeah.
Right.
And thank you, everyone. I will invite all of you to join us on March 11, actually, for our next lecture with Francois Sabourin. The lecture is entitled To Be Determined, and it will be held in person. So unfortunately, we cannot stream. It will be in person and will be offered Zoom lunch for whoever is here with us. He is our Shadowsky Fellow at the CUDC, or at the Kent State College of Architecture. So I welcome everybody that is in Cleveland and Kent to join us here. Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Later.